On today's show concerning coaching trends for Ime Udoka, both with his time here in Houston as well as Boston, and can some of these issues be resolved moving forward? It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What is up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, the #1 sports podcast network. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets. On today's show, we're going to be discussing some of the concerning coaching trends with Ime Udoka, both from his time here in Houston as well as his time with the Boston Celtics. We will hear from Celtics fans themselves and some of their frustrations with Ime Udoka, some of his shortcomings in Boston, and taking a look at these issues that this Rockets team has faced with Ime Udoka in the coach's seat, and trying to see if there's ways to address or fix some of these problems moving forward, as well as how it impacts the Rockets organizationally moving forward. Going to get into all of that on today's show, as well as there were, after the recap of the Knicks game, right? That was a pretty, that was a pretty raw episode from me. And there were a number of comments and questions kind of follow up, like, hey, well, the big one is, why wouldn't Ime Udoka be on the hot seat at this point? And so I'm going to address that as well. Kind of trying to view things from the org's standpoint. So going to get into a lot of different things on today's episode. First one, thank you so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. Now, it almost feels like the honeymoon period with Ime Udoka has started to wear off with Rockets fans, and I think that ultimately there's some gray area in here, right? Because there's a lot of Rockets fans who are like, Ime is a terrible coach. He's awful. He's garbage. Get him out of here. Run him out of Houston. I don't subscribe to that notion, but I also have some pretty serious reservations about Udoka as a possible championship caliber head coach, right? Like I think the truth probably falls somewhere more in the middle. And I do still think, right, like when the Rockets hired Ime Udoka, he was exactly what this organization needed. They needed somebody to come in and provide a culture, a sense of accountability. They needed somebody to get the Houston Rockets playing respectable basketball again, right? Somebody to kind of, get all these young guys in order, teach them the value of playing defense, of being accountable, of fighting hard every night, of bringing a toughness and an edge to every single game. And all of that is incredibly important stuff, right? But that's kind of the bare minimum. Like, that's like, okay, cool. So you got the guys playing hard, fighting hard on defense, all that stuff. But then there's levels to it, right? There, and obviously one of the biggest gripes that a lot of Rockets fans have, and one of the things that we've talked about ad nauseum on the show, is how bland and how frustrating and painful the offense has looked in these 2.5 years with Ime Udoka. And so I wanted to run through, and in specifically this season, right? Like it's the crunch time execution that has just been absolutely abysmal. And obviously no Fred VanVleet is a big part of that. And no Fred VanVleet would absolutely fix a lot of the problems, or having Fred VanVleet would fix a lot of the problems with this current Rockets team. But I also think that, unfortunately, Fred VanVleet is a Band-Aid fix for a situation in which, or for a situation that could be resolved by better offensive coaching, right? By better offensive principles, by better offensive execution. And a lot of that falls on the head coach for not having these players prepared to excel in different roles, right? You see other teams with injuries to, whether it's star players, role players, other guys, and this idea, right, that Fred VanVleet is so integral to the Rockets' success that they had their general manager go out post trade deadline and basically kind of jokingly say, maybe it's not our year. That's kind of damning, right? Like Fred VanVleet shouldn't be the make or break factor for any team. Fred is fantastic. He's awesome. But basically saying that the season is a wash because you don't have Fred VanVleet is kind of ridiculous. But I wanted to get into some of the numbers behind how frustrating this Rockets team has been this year, and then kind of unpack even further, right? We're going to hear from some Celtics fans and their experience with Ime Udoka. I'll share my thoughts about kind of where the org needs to go moving forward from here and trying to address some of these problems. But these are the clutch numbers for the Rockets this season. They have 144 total minutes played in the clutch, which is, again, within 5 points within the final 5 minutes of a game. That's second most in the NBA. They have a 14-16 record in the clutch, a 47% win percentage, which is 20th in the NBA, so bottom 10. They're only scoring 1.08 points per possession in the clutch. That's good for 22nd. 1.17 points per possession given up on defense, so that's 24th in the NBA. They have a minus 8.8 net rating in the clutch, which is 25th in the NBA, so bottom 5. 53% true shooting in the clutch, that's 22nd. A 1.16 assist to turnover ratio, which is 28th in the clutch. And then 66 total opponents' points off turnovers, which is dead last, 30th in the entire association. Shout out to Funaki Stats for pulling these numbers, good friend of the program. Those are not championship caliber numbers. And this is where, if you go back and if you segment this Rocket season, right, so much of the first 6 weeks of the year are doing some serious heavy lifting for how good this Rockets team looks on paper, right? I think the other day they mentioned on one of the broadcasts, the Rockets are the 8th best offense in the NBA. They've slipped out of the top 5 because of how bad the offense has been since basically December 1st. And that number is going to continue to slide, right? Thankfully, there's times where the defense is able to lock in a little bit better now, but this team has regressed considerably from where they were earlier in the season. And then you factor in, those were the numbers, right? Those are the actual production, the numbers in the clutch. And then you look at the raw numbers. This season already, the Rockets have had 11 fourth quarter collapses where they've led in the fourth and haven't been able to finish off a game. And throughout Ime Udoka's entire 3-year tenure with the Rockets, 2.5, whatever, still some change left in this season, they have had 37 fourth quarter leads that have led to fourth quarter collapses. And we're not talking like, oh, they led by 2, if they led for like 2 possessions, at one point in the fourth quarter. No, these are like substantial leads that the Rockets have like completely choked up, given up, and completely wilted and fallen apart at the end of games. And so this doesn't just apply to this season. Yeah, 11 of them happened this year, but that leaves 26 other moments, 26 other games across the first 2 years of Ime Udoka's tenure where the Rockets have just completely fallen apart at the end of games. And this is an incredibly concerning trend with Ime Udoka, right? The inability to execute in crunch time, the inability to find any semblance of offensive rhythm. And, I've joked about this before, but it very much feels like Ime Udoka's ideal outcome for a game is he would rather win a game 92-88 than win a game 125-112. And that doesn't feel good, right? He has a built-in like internal bias, it feels like, to want to win with defense. And there hasn't really been the same amount of emphasis placed on the offensive side of the ball. And we see that whenever the Rockets play a good defensive team, whenever they play another upper echelon team, feels weird saying another upper echelon team because is this Rockets team really an upper echelon team, or are they a fake upper echelon team? And they get exposed. They get exposed on offense consistently by other head coaches, by other teams, by other organizations. And it's been an incredibly painful watch to see this season. Coming up, I do want to talk about and share some of the experiences from Boston Celtics fans that have experienced what we're experiencing right now with Ime Udoka as a head coach, and also getting into trying to figure out, what are some of the possible answers for what we're witnessing, and how does the organization move forward with what we've kind of learned about Ime in his time here in Houston and all that stuff. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Ever wanted to experience the NBA Finals live and in person? FanDuel is giving you the chance to turn that dream into reality with their NBA sweepstakes. Here's how it works. Use your profit boost on any NBA future, and you'll automatically be entered for a shot to win an NBA Finals trip for two. That's right. Flights, tickets, the whole experience, totally paid for. If you're already looking at the board and thinking about which team can make a deep run, this is the perfect time to lock it in. Futures this time of year are great, whether it's picking a team to win a championship or grab a conference title. It adds that extra layer of excitement to every single game down the stretch. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, not only are Rockets fans frustrated and feeling some disappointment at times with Ime Udoka's coaching and especially the lack of what feels like offensive identity or structure with this Rockets team. And this has not been a complaint that's just popped up this year, right? This has been something that we've kind of harped on through the first couple years of Ime Udoka's tenure with the Rockets. But at the same time, fresh out of the Silas era, he got the team playing respectable basketball. Like, you take the good with the bad. And so, but over time, and especially with expectations being raised with the addition of Kevin Durant, everything is being scrutinized under like a microscope, right? Like, we're looking at everything in such detail, trying to figure out, okay, where can this Rockets team improve? How far away are they compared to other legitimate contenders this season? What are the areas that need to be fixed? And I think you go back to, right, his tenure with the Celtics, and here's a couple things that stand out. One, these are all comments from Celtics fans who, and shout out to friend of the program, Rahat Red 94 on Twitter, who asked and said, really curious to hear from Celtics fans what their impressions are on Ime, especially after winning the title with Missoula. I'm so completely out on this guy right now. I'm not quite where Rahat is at, right? I'm not completely out on Ime. I do think this team has faced some serious adversity. But it is interesting hearing these reactions from Celtics fans. So the first comment, I'm just going to read through a set of these comments. Not counting the COVID season, the Jays, so Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, have had a top 5 offense every season but one. You can guess who the coach was for that one season. Ime Udoka. Next comment. After his third game with us, I realized he is a downgrade significantly compared to Brad Stevens. Winning streak he achieved at the end of the season and reaching the finals were largely due to player development and a sense of urgency. I felt no fear the day he was fired a week before the season started. And again, within 15 games, it was clear that Missoula is a better coach. There is an argument to be made that Missoula was already the better coach when Ime was still head coach, and Joe was the architect of his best in the league defense. I will never forgive him for playing drop coverage against Steph Curry in the damn finals. Brought great defense and culture, but had no idea what to do on offense. His lack of accountability and constant calling out of players was a nice change of pace, but wore thin quickly. Here's another one. Trying not to be biased, but we had a huge tendency to blow leads, have stagnant offense, and his in-game adjustments were terrible. Had his favorites and struggled with developing young players. Pritchard requested a trade while Ime was here, so I sympathize with Sheppard. We were below 500 until the middle of January, and even our finals run got extended too long due to blown leads. Yeah. And so, like, those are some pretty damning statements from Celtics fans, right? And, one of my long-held concerns, right, and this dates back to, like, at some point last season, I started having these thoughts where I was like, is Ime Udoka just another, like, is he Mark Jackson? Is he, Tom Thibodeau? Like, there are these, there's this handful of, like, coaches from a specific, like, not a pop coaching tree, but just that have this affinity for defense where they are, defensive tacticians, masterminds on that end, hold guys accountable, rah, kind of drill sergeant mentality. And that works. And it has an incredibly high floor. And this is where, I'm very curious, right? Because if the floor of that style of head coach, can the floor of that style of head coach be high enough to get you to the finals to give you a shot to win a championship, right? Clearly it can, because Ime Udoka managed to coach a Celtics team to the finals. But then when you run up against other opponents, when you run up against other coaches that are going to use their offensive creativity and guys that are going to get a little bit more out of their players than what Ime is getting, then that's where things get a little sticky. And I do think that, given the abundance of talent on this Rockets roster, I think one of the main issues, one of my personal issues looking at how this season has gone and even the previous couple seasons, it feels like at times the talent, this is mainly an issue for this season, it feels like the talent hasn't been truly maximized, right? It feels like Alperen Şengün hasn't been really maximized and, leaning into his skill sets as the team's best playmaker, the best facilitator, right? Finding different creative ways to get Kevin Durant the basketball rather than just letting him walk the ball up the court and initiate the offense every time down. Not leaning into Reed Sheppard more on a team that literally doesn't have a single viable point guard outside of the number 3 overall pick that they drafted, and they're still not using him, right? So, and there were, I remember seeing the other day, this wasn't as part of the comments in reply to Rahat's post on social media, but I remember seeing, Celtics fans the other day, whether it was Reddit, Twitter, or whatever, complaining that, Ime Udoka preferred playing Marcus Smart over Derek White because Marcus Smart was in his eyes, better defender, right? Like Marcus Smart was one of his guys. He was an Ime guy. And so Marcus Smart played more than Derek White did. And now Derek White's balling out and basically playing like a borderline all-star for the Celtics. And he's a guy that like every team would love to get their hands on because he's incredible. But it took, right, Joe Mazzulla empowering Derek White for him to become that. And like, I remember like looking this up, also trying to figure out, looking at some of the numbers, right? You go back to, when the Celtics, when Mazzulla took over for the Celtics, right, their offense jumped up like 7 spots. They were like 9th in the offense when Ime was the head coach, and then they jumped up to like number 2 in the NBA or number 1 or something ridiculous the following year when Mazzulla took over. And I don't think that's just they grew internally and they just got better. No, Joe Mazzulla is an offensive genius, and he is able to still hold the team accountable and keep them playing high level defense while also capitalizing on the offensive end of the basketball and doing some really creative stuff. And you see a Celtics team this year without their best player in Jason Tatum, and without, they lost Drew Holiday, they lost Al Horford, they were going to be starting Nemes Keita and Luka Garza, and everybody looked at the Celtics and thought, oh man, they're going to be awful. They're going to miss the playoffs. They're not going to be good. And they're floating at the top of the Western Conference, top of the Eastern Conference. And that's good coaching right there, man. The Thunder being able to survive injuries to guys like J-Dub last season and also J-Dub this season, or missing Chet Holmgren and Isaiah Hartenstein for each of them missed like half the year last year, and they still went on to have the best record in the NBA and win the NBA Finals. That's coaching, right? That's also some roster depth and some other stuff, but that it really does lend itself to the argument that like good coaching can elevate a team that is struggling or missing key players or any of that stuff. And it feels like at times the Rockets are desperately missing some of that when you see some of these blown leads, when you see some of these collapses, when you see the same thing happening over and over and over again, the turnovers, the inability to generate offense, the lack of composure and poise and execution down the stretch of games. At some point, there is a common denominator. At some point, you have to look at Ime Udoka and say, what the hell is going on, man? How do you fix this? How do you address this? How do you get better moving forward? And that's what we're going to talk about coming up here in just one moment. How do the Rockets move forward from this? Can Ime Udoka learn from some of these mistakes in his past? And can he adjust and hold himself accountable moving forward? We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. Workplace chaos, deadlines stacking up, inbox overflowing, and the one position that you have to fill is still sitting open. When the pressure's on and you need the right hire, this is a job for sponsored jobs. Indeed Sponsored Jobs helps you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for: skills, experience, location, so you're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute that I've been talking to you, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed sponsored jobs. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help you get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. So having kind of laid the foundation here and talked about, shown the evidence, and we've seen it with our own eyes, some of the struggles of this Rockets team this season. I said after that collapse against the Knicks that these are the types of games, these are the types of collapses that put coaches on the hot seat, but Ime Udoka wouldn't be on the hot seat. And a number of people were like, why? Why wouldn't he be on the hot seat? For a couple of reasons. One, organizationally, top to bottom, the Rockets do still believe in Ime, and they believe he's their guy, and they're still bought in on what he brings to the table. And on top of that, kind of to piggyback off that, the reason they're so bought in, right, or as evidence as to how bought in they are, they extended him before the season started, right? He was only 2 years through his 4-year contract, and they extended him and gave him a 4-year extension. So Ime is here for this season and currently under contract for at least 5 more seasons. At least that's I think, at media day, Ime kind of let it slip that he'd be here for the next 6 years, whatever. So right now he's on the Rockets are on the hook for 5 more years of Ime Udoka. So yeah, I mean, they could cut bait. They could move on from Ime, but they'd have to pay him out for 5 years. And so I don't want to say it's rare. We've seen other organizations, hire a coach and then immediately fire them after 1 season. And I mean, hell, the Suns were still paying, oh my God, Monty Williams on top of paying 2 other coaches, right? It was ridiculous. And the Pistons, same thing. Like they fired Monty after 1 year and had to pay him out for his entire $72 million contract. So, it's not unheard of. It's not impossible for the Rockets to potentially look at moving on from him, but I think that they won't do it for that reason. Also, I think that Ime has a built-in defense for this year because of the injuries, right? Because of the adversity that this team has faced this season, and because of the fact that this team is also still the 3rd seed in the West. Like, they are still a good team. They are. This Rockets team is still good. They're still winning games. They still have a shot to make a deep postseason run. So when you look at this team, like from the half glass full perspective, with the talent, with the individual talent of Kevin Durant and Alperen Şengün, when the role players are playing their best basketball, this Rockets team can contend and compete with anybody. Half glass empty, they're going to get exposed in a 7-game series against any of the teams that are actually better than them in the postseason, right? If they go up against the Thunder or the Spurs or the Nuggets in a 7-game series, I'd be very concerned about Ime's ability to get the best out of this team in a 7-game series and ultimately come out on top and make the needed adjustments once other teams start to game plan for and against, some of the weaknesses on this Rockets roster, of which there are plenty. So I don't think that he's going to be on any kind of a hot seat this season, even though some of these losses would demand that the coach be put on the hot seat. And at this point, the question kind of becomes, okay, well, if you've got a high floor with Ime, right? If the floor with Ime is you can win, minimum, 50 games a year and be, home court advantage, top end of your conference, that kind of thing. Cool. But what is the ceiling of an Ime Udoka coach team, right? Is the ceiling 2nd round exit, conference finals, maybe a finals trip if you really get the most out of a team? Can he win in the NBA finals? Or would it be another situation where he gets into the finals and gets out-coached on the other side, right? Which is exactly what happened when he went there with the Celtics and then dealt with the Warriors and didn't have the right coverages and all this stuff for Steph Curry. Now, I will say the Rockets did a damn good job dealing with Steph Curry in their playoff series, last season, right? It was probably some of the tough. Steph said after the series, it was one of the toughest, if not the toughest series he'd ever played, dealing with the Rockets' defensive schemes and how they tried to shut him down on a night-to-night basis. So there's credit where credit is due, right? Ime did learn from his mistakes there and learned how to try and shut down Steph Curry in that series, but that took a couple years, right? It took a while for him to, pour over film and in between coaching jobs and all that. Can he make those adjustments on the fly in a given playoff series is the major concern. And will he continue to dig his heels in regards to, preferring defensive guys over some of the offensive weapons that he has at his disposal. Case in point, Reed Sheppard. Like, because this is one of the most perplexing things about this year is that if the general manager in Rafael Stone is saying maybe it's just not our year, injuries, all that stuff, it's just, oh, we're just unlucky, right? We can't win without Fred. Oh no. Well, then, like, what's the point of this season? Like, if they're not going to be able to win without Fred VanVleet, then why not play Reed Sheppard, the number 3 overall pick, give him 35 plus minutes a night, let him start games, and let him figure things out, right? Because if the season's a wash anyways, then prioritize development. So is the goal for this season to still try and win a title, or is the goal to develop young guys? Because right now it feels like the Rockets are kind of caught in the middle. And that's a very awkward place to be. It's not fun. It's not fun. I'm sure it's not fun for the players. It's certainly not fun for the fans. It feels weird. So getting through all that, one of the other things that I've kind of in the past, I've kind of said it jokingly, but there's a hint of truth to it. And I want to draw a comparison here. I think that one of the best coached teams that I've ever had the personal pleasure of witnessing, covering, all that, was the 2017-2018 Rockets squad that won a franchise best 65 games, went toe-to-toe with the Kevin Durant era Warriors, right? Obviously, it ended with sadness with the Chris Paul hamstring, all that stuff. But that team was coached by Mike D'Antoni. Mike D'Antoni is the absolute inverse of Ime Udoka, right? Anybody remember Game of Zones? Half the defense, double the offense. So like that's Mike D'Antoni in a nutshell, right? And you know what? Mike D'Antoni had the self-awareness to understand that about himself. And so the Rockets went out when they brought in Mike D'Antoni. They also brought in Jeff Bzdelik to be his lead assistant and to quarterback the defense, because Mike just didn't care about that side of the ball. And you know what? The Rockets were not only one of the best offenses in the NBA, they were also one of the best defenses in the NBA. I think that it would go a long way if the Rockets legitimately brought in, if Ime Udoka was able to humble himself enough to be willing to bring in somebody to help, an offensive mind to help actually quarterback the Rockets offense. Because there's a great point, right? When he was in Boston, he had Will Hardy, he had Joe Mazzulla, he had Damon Stoudemire on his coaching staff, 3 guys that he does not have access to on his current coaching staff. And so maybe Ben Sullivan and Royale Ivy and Garrett Jackson, maybe they're not enough, right? As far as figuring out things on the offensive side of the ball compared to what those other guys maybe brought to the table for that Celtics team. I joked before that when the Rockets hired Ime Udoka, I was like, oh man, I would love for them to bring in Borrego as, his lead assistant, right? They have a history. They were under the Pop coaching tree. Maybe he can bring him in, maybe pull some strings, because Borrego's an offensive mastermind too. And Borrego's, in his stops when he was with the Hornets as a head coach, and now that he's taken over for the Pelicans, right? He does some creative stuff on offense. And so if internally the Rockets maybe aren't necessarily ready to move on from Ime, or if Ime's not on the hot seat, I hope that at least they're looking at the results from this season, the now damn near 3 years of data of the Rockets half-court offense being straight up abysmal, being worse than tanking teams in the half-court, is wholly unacceptable for a team with title aspirations. A team that has basically been propped up by Fred VanVleet on offense, as well as the offensive rebounding numbers being, through the roof, thanks to Steven Adams and just the one piece of offensive identity this team has, which is crash the offensive glass at all costs. Hopefully they're able to look at all of that evidence and say, you know what, something needs to change. And at least right now, my opinion is that something doesn't need to be firing Ime Udoka. I don't think that has to be this situation isn't black or white, right? It doesn't have to be, oh, get rid of Ime, bring in a new coach. But things do need to change, right? Things need to improve and get better. And I do think that at this point, we have enough evidence through Ime's 1 year at Boston and through almost 3 years here in Houston now to be able to look at his body of work as a head coach and be like, you know what? He might just be the inverse of Mike D'Antoni. All defense, no offense. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That identity as a head coach has an incredibly high floor. Again, we've seen it before with guys like Mark Jackson, Tom Thibodeau. If you really want to go further back, Jeff Van Gundy, right? Those teams have a high floor. Those teams are competitive. They fight hard. They're a threat to any team they come across on any given night. But those teams also have glaring weaknesses on the offensive side of the ball. And so I think at that point, the Rockets need to do some really deep self-evaluation, some self-reflection this offseason, in particular Ime, right? To try and figure out, okay, how can we be better moving forward? Because I don't think the answer is just, you know what, they'll just get to the offseason regardless of what happens this year. And, you know, next year they'll get Fred back, they'll get Steven back. And if it's just the exact same thing with Fred and Steven back, yeah, they probably win more games and they look a lot better, but the issues are still there. Like, I don't think it's fair to expect players to fix issues that are clearly the fault of the coaching staff. Again, those feel like Band-Aid fixes more than anything at this point. And so I'm curious your thoughts, right? Like on, you know, where do you stand on Ime Udoka? How do you feel about his coaching ability? Do you believe in Ime Udoka's ability to coach this Rockets team to a title? I still think he's capable of doing it. I think that we've seen some really amazing stuff from Ime in 2.5 years. And I think that there is some encouraging stuff that he does on a night-to-night basis. But I also think that, you know, there are still glaring weaknesses there, and it's about figuring out and addressing those weaknesses moving forward. And if the answer to that is simply just, yeah, they need Fred VanVleet or they need a point guard to run the show, then cool. But at the same time, you know, you have a point guard in Reed Sheppard whose development is being squandered, it feels like at this point, or at least his development's not being accelerated the way it probably could or should be, given the absence of Fred VanVleet this season. And on top of that, one other note here, just might as well include this at the end of the episode. Amin Thompson is out for Wednesday night's game against the Kings because he's top 3 in minutes played this season. And Ime is, you know, one of the tendencies of those style of head coaches, right? And this is straight out of the Tom Thibodeau playbook, is just running your best players into the ground. And Ime runs Amin Thompson ragged on a nightly basis, right? And I do think that there would be a level of, if you could reduce some of the minutes on some of your key players, right? If you could get Amin Thompson down from about, 40 minutes a game, whatever he's playing, down to about 35, just shave some minutes off of him so that he could be more fresh, well-rested, giving his all consistently. That would help a ton of the guys on the roster, right? Because they'd be able to give better effort on offense. They wouldn't be as exhausted, or as the better effort on defense. They wouldn't be as exhausted, on offense, dead legs, all that kind of thing. But Wednesday night, who's Ime going to start in place of Amin Thompson? If it's anybody other than Reed Sheppard, Rockets fans are probably going to riot in the streets because, get this, Josh Okogie, who has been awesome for this Rockets team, better than advertised, right? A complete value, complete steal for his value as a minimum contract guy, and stepped in a big way with all the injuries the Rockets dealt with earlier this season. This is no shade towards Josh Okogie, but in the last 5 games, Josh Okogie has received 3 DNPs. 3 DNPs in the last 5 games. And in the 2 games that he did play, he played 9 minutes and 12 minutes. If that is the guy that Ime Udoka elects to start over the number 3 overall pick, who's had a very encouraging sophomore season, a guy who is, at least on paper, the future heir apparent to become the starting point guard of this Rockets team one day down the line whenever Fred VanVleet eventually hangs him up, then what are we doing? Like, it makes no sense. Again, Steven Silas is to Alperen Şengün what Ime Udoka is to Reed Sheppard at this point in their respective careers. It's not quite as egregious with Reed Sheppard because he is still getting, 20, 25, 30 minutes a night. And there have been some games where Ime has unleashed him, but he hasn't just leaned all the way into it yet. And a huge part of that happens to be because of his perception of Reed's inability to defend, right? There are games where Ime talks about Reed's defense, and now they were targeting him, and he was getting hurt with, and it's just like, well, yeah, that's going to happen. And if you're a defensive mastermind, then help your guy out, right? Find different ways to put the onus on the other 4 guys to help cover for Reed. That's the whole point of having a good defensive coach, is being able to come up with cool, fancy, awesome defensive schemes to help cover for your weaker defensive players. If you need good defensive players to be a good defensive coach, then you might not be a good defensive coach. That might be harsh, but that also feels like truth. So I'm very curious your thoughts on everything, Ime Udoka, Rockets coaching, all that stuff. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I didn't even get to my final point, which is just that, my major concern is I don't want to see the Rockets make any drastic changes to the integrity of this roster based on finding guys that cater towards Ime Udoka's coaching style. Because, like, you see a guy like Alperen Şengün, who is maybe not truly an Ime guy at his core because he's not a defense first player, all that stuff. He's got his limitations on that side at times. So much of that is tied into his effort, right? When Alperen Şengün's actually playing with maximum effort, he can be awesome defensively. He can be a two-way impact player when he wants to be. But like my concern is, right, like I don't know if like I would hate to see this Rockets team trade Sengun for Giannis in the offseason because Ime wants Giannis instead of Sengun. Like I would feel like that would be a catastrophic mistake for this organization. And so that's my major concern, is that they get through this year and they're like, all right, let's clean shop. Who's not an Ime guy? Let's get him out of here. Let's go get a bunch of Ime guys and let's run it back with Fred and Adams and a bunch of defense guys. And our offense is basically going to be the exact same thing. It's just going to be Kevin Durant and Giannis taking turns with the ball. That'd be miserable. So that's what I don't want to see happen moving forward. Give me all your thoughts in the YouTube comments. As always, thanks so much for checking out the show. Remember, the best way to help us grow the show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.